and welcome to Alaska Commercial Real Estate. Today, I am your host, Phil. Joining me is Alaskan economist and commercial real estate appraiser, Lydia.
Hello.
Well, welcome. This is week 9, and we are in the first week of March already. Breakup's practically here.
Yes,
Winter's
6 weeks.
Nearly over. Well, on the Kenai Peninsula, the tropics of Alaska, it was above freezing and sunny today.
No, but you can
close.
pretend.
What are you going to do? Hey, winter is almost over, and the markets are awakening. So we have a great show for you today. Or are they? We have a great show this week. As always, we have a national topic of relevance to Alaska and commercial real estate markets. We'll talk about something happening here in Alaska specifically, and on our Ask an Appraiser question, stay tuned towards the end. This week we'll be talking about the differences in types of square footage and specifically what gross building area and leasable areas and rentable areas and all these kind of weird terms that you may or may not be used to seeing or hearing, and what goes into the thoughts, or at least the definitions behind them, and how they may affect you in whatever type of real estate you're using them in. So, to start us off, Lydia, what's happening nationally?
Well, according to Rent Cafe, the average size of new apartments in 2022 was 887 square feet, 54 square feet less than 10 years ago.
About the size of the average Alaskan garage.
Yeah, sure. So this is the largest year-over-year decrease. And this is part and due, they're saying, to more construction of studio and one-bedroom units in 2022, reaching a historic share of 57%. So,
well, we just quoted some proposed construction projects up in the Fairbanks North Pole area, and amongst the list of unit types that we were analyzing for the quote was a bunch of studios.
Yes.
And that's not something that we normally see outside of our major metropolis city of Anchorage.
Very true. It's very common in downtown areas and more dense areas. So It is very uncommon to see that in more rural or in more suburban areas.
Yeah, again, we'll have to kind of be careful about, we haven't even got the job yet if we're going to get it. But I don't know who else they would give it to, but there's not a lot of qualified commercial appraisers in Alaska to do these projects. Right. But you never know, some things don't actually go to lending then and the project stops. But with that said, it's not a normal unit type that we get. And those were not major metropolitan, certainly, even though they were similar to a city or similar, they were within proximity, near proximity of a city. They certainly were not in densely populated areas of the city. And it was not the first time that this builder has built that unit type, and it's an experienced builder, according to the lender.
Possibly it's maybe unique in itself. I think traditionally we see more of a mix of 2 and 3s or 1 and 2s in complexes. So to see studios, or like sometimes called efficiencies in one project, is not very typical. So I think it might be they're recognizing there's a product that's needed in the market, and they're hoping to fill that.
Well, we'll see. If we get that job, we'll certainly conduct the market study to find out what that looks like. The last time we did a building that had similar type units was actually in Anchorage, and we talked a little bit about it last week.
Yes.
So
that was a retrofit. So it's
that one went to foreclosure.
Right.
So that will be interesting. Will it work? Will it not work? Again, this is not a new lender and not a new builder. So when we analyze these sorts of things and look at them, we look at what is the experience of the players involved and what made them determine that they wanted to build that unit type. But it's very interesting that this comes up for us as a large news organization nationally starts talking about this trend and the trend towards efficiency studio type units, and certainly smaller. We've seen the tiny home movement become a thing, and we've seen the idea of detached mother-in-law or accessory dwelling units get smaller and smaller. And certainly there's been a trend in real estate over the last 2 to 3 years to build under the speculation of income property for the nightly or short-term rental market, meaning VRBO, Airbnb. And those are smaller units that are more efficient in size. So it'd be interesting to know what the pool study was for this story and how much influence there was in the short-term rental market towards this type of...
Well, it is the long-term rental market, and it's over 100 largest markets, which of course Alaska's not included in. So
I am absolutely shocked to hear you say that. That is news to me.
But anyway, it's interesting because it's 2 years of increase in apartment sizes over 2020 to 2021 for obvious reasons.
Obvious being the flu that came from overseas.
Yes. People were living and working.
That's in the news again this week.
Going to school, doing everything in their home. And so we did see an increase in apartment sizes in construction, new construction. And then actually last year they're saying was a historic year for construction of apartments in general. Over the past 50 years. So it's we're starting to see supply trying to catch up with demand. We do see developers try to catch that unique model. So in different areas of the country, it's different. So in the South, apartments are typically larger, or then you get into more metro, very dense areas. They're typically smaller. Actually, Pacific Northwest is some of the smallest average apartment sizes, actually 110 square feet smaller than average of nationwide.
Well, it can't be coincidental where the costs of construction are higher, and as you mentioned, the density of population and certainly the costs associated with energy has a direct effect, because you can only have so much of a cost in a building without having that be pushed onto the renters or buyers, and certainly the higher the costs, the higher the price. And there has to be a cap and an equilibrium in there somewhere. So
and that's reflected a lot, I think, in these large metro areas where costs are higher for construction.
So that'll be interesting to continue to follow as not just the face and demographic of our population changes and our age and everything else about our country continues to change. Housing will change along with it.
Yes. Again, these builders are watching these changes and these shifts and the needs of their market participants, and they're looking to kind of capture what the demand is. And so sometimes they're spot on, sometimes they catch it as it's ongoing, and sometimes they fall behind and we kind of miss it a little bit. So
well, as a business appraiser myself, one of the things we try to tell our clients, and here's some free advice, look for a need that's not being met in the market, provide it. It seems to be one of the key areas to make money in just about any aspect of business, whether it's development of real estate, products, or services.
Right.
Okay, so there's your free advice for the day. What's happening in Alaska outside of similar trends? But what's the news here in Alaska, commercial real estate?
March Alaska Trends was released.
Yes.
State of Alaska. Again, focusing on population.
Yeah, I read the cover, and it looked to me like, given the extensive knowledge that I now have of the entire magazine, having read the cover, once again, they are proving something that we said months ago, and again, just a couple of weeks ago, and now it's all of a sudden a story. So, hey, once again, Lydia, congratulations on being correct.
Yeah, well, I think they're just admitting what we already saw was happening. Is that this trend of net migration being negative, it has continued.
Yeah.
And we've lost 3,000 more residents than we gained in the past 10 years. So that's
is that an average number. Or a total? Because that's not a lot of money overall.
That's 53,000 people. It's negative loss over the last 10
negative
years.
Their loss.
Yeah. So, but we did see these last 2 years were some of the smaller net losses, which we're not really sure if that's related to.
There's been a lot of external influences over population in the last couple of years. Yeah.
That little blip we had.
Well, we're allowed to say it on Rumble and on our own website. We can say China flu, but YouTube may remove us, and who cares?
So we're not really sure if that's a temporary kind of stall or slowing of loss, but
the numbers will play out in the long term to prove whether it was a minor blip. Right. Or a establishing trend.
Right. So according to the numbers we're seeing, more people did migrate to Alaska in 2022 than any year since 2013. However, there was still a net negative migration overall, because more people left than we've seen since 2017. So,
and you and I have been saying for a while that some of that really is just the aging of the population. So a lot of people who live in Alaska, they live here because they work here and because the pay is well here.
Yes.
Sometimes, and in some fields. But when they retire to a place that's a little easier on the joints and the bones and the extremes and the wallet, because Alaska is a very expensive place to live. Your retirement money goes a lot further in other states.
Yes, and we are seeing, though, natural increase, which is births minus deaths, which is also tracked, is the lowest it's been since the 1950s. So we're having more deaths occurring and less births occurring. So with those two compounding, we're seeing this natural.
But that is a national. That is a national trend as well. I mean, is Alaska sticking out in any of those areas, and that we're more or less than other places, or we're kind of just because those are statistics that match elsewhere, even
yes,
globally.
Of course. I mean, as you're pointing out before, our older generation is one of the larger generations, and so I mean, with the less births happening, it's.
And we're talking about the Walmart greeter generation, right? So you're kind of moved beyond. You're no longer a Walmart executive. You're now a Walmart greeter,
right?
And that's you're no longer in the primary workforce anymore, and. Those people of that age and work group, and that's a moving point.
It is
as far as age. Some people are unable to work effectively at different points. So we're just saying those that are less effective in the overall workforce, as far as being able to work any job, that population tends to not stay here.
Yes, but it also, that population has seen an increase in deaths in the past 3 years. So
I don't know what's happened in the last 3 years that would cause a lot of unexplained deaths. But
so the change in birth is I think a national trend. We're seeing less birth rate nationwide. So that again affects kind of the overall population, which we spoke before about the young population being smaller, and that the age of the school-age children is smaller now, and so that's really shifting the way the school districts are getting funded, as they're funded per student. And they're looking at probably not a very large increase in.
Well, and that
students.
does affect statistics of students, especially in primary schools. Does affect in some way. How direct, I don't know, but. There is an effect on the values of residential real estate that comes from that. The population bulges in age, right? Younger children tend to live in a certain type of residential home, as opposed to older children. So all those statistical studies in the way that the market trends and changes are interesting. And again, for developers, this is important.
Yes.
For real estate investors, as in, should you buy fourplexes right now, or should you buy larger plexes? Should you focus on duplexes or single family? What's going to be profitable, and getting ahead of those trends. One of the trends that's been happening in Alaska, again, as we talk about just the aging of the population, is getting away from multi-story, because multi-story in Alaska is much more efficient to build and heat. But with those, like myself, with really bad knees, we're not looking for places with stairs. And
right.
Oddly enough, it's not common to put elevators in single-family homes. We have seen two that we've actually appraised in Alaska. We've seen it twice, and before much longer, there may be a third, because I'm all for the elevator in our home, but
right. Yeah. So but
the nature of what developers are going to build,
yes,
right, and what's being desired and what's going to sit vacant, that affects the value of properties,
definitely.
And the features and amenities,
right,
and style.
Yeah, for sure. And we've spoken many times about the age of inventory in real estate, and that's true in single family homes as well. And we're seeing the new construction in a lot of areas is being more single level type homes,
ranch.
Yes, because of this need of well, for one, less space, and also mobility, right? Get the stairs. Yeah. So because there isn't as many of that type in the existing inventory, we've seen a lot of new construction of that. So it's it does play into the changing and shifts of the real estate market for sure.
Well, residential appraisers certainly should be following those trends much closer than we are. It's less involved in the type of real estate that we appraise typically. But if a residential appraiser is doing their job correctly, then they should have done a bunch of paired sales analysis to come up with adjustment rates for different styles of building, ranch versus multi-story.
Right.
For a while, what we saw the the vaulted attic spaces and the diminished wall sizes in annexed style in the commercial, what am I looking for? In the bunch of the tiny house model with vaulted ceilings and shorter walls.
Loft space.
Loft style. That's what I was looking for. So the lofts were popular for a while.
Yes.
And now, so it's looking like they're less popular. So.
Well, the problem with loft space is the access, and typically when a lot of them are accessed via kind of a ladder, which can be very difficult to navigate. So or these spiral staircases they use for reducing the footprint of the stairs or easier to install. It certainly does limit the type of use potentially, as well as the type of buyer.
Right.
So it's we see that a lot with seasonal housing for
you don't tend to put your gym up in a loft that's accessed by a spiral staircase, because how do you get your treadmill up there?
Exactly.
And everybody knows that treadmills go in the bedroom just to augment as closet space. It's a place to hang clothes, but so the nature of things changes, and good appraisers on the different characteristics of their markets should have the statistical data to properly adjust for those. And I'm glad that that's not something that we typically do, so we don't have to come up with spiral staircase adjustments and other types. So anyway, great. Then once again, so that's a trend happening here. Do you have any other Alaska news specifically?
Oh, let's see. The University of Alaska Small Business Development Center has released $49 million for lending through the state small business and credit initiative. So what that is it's incentivizes lenders who participate in the program to make loans to Alaska-based small businesses. This funds came from the U.S. Department of Treasury from the 2021 American Rescue Plan Act. And so it's now just being distributed to the state, and then from the state they give the...
Go from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you think you qualify for something like that, then by all means contact your Alaskan lender. Be a good idea. Those are, a number of banks. You can look those up. We like Northrim. We like Denali State.
Small business.
McKinley.
Administration.
Another great bank. The small SBA should be able to tell you. I think the state actually has an SBA office.
They do.
So you could go through them and they could tell you where to access those funds. But again, we like Northrim. We like Denali State Bank, McKinley Bank, and I guess we have to say we like First National. They do give us enough business a year that we'll have to continue to like them as long as they pay their bills on time. And am I leaving? Hopefully, I'm not leaving one of our regular clients out. Did I get them all? We don't really work with Credit Union One. They don't really do commercial lending. We don't really work with Key Bank to Non-Alaska Bank, and they don't really do a lot of commercial lending. So, and then obviously the national banks that lend in Alaska, arguably that is or may not be Wells Fargo. They're all over the place. And then Bank of America does do lending. We've seen SBA loans go through Bank of America.
Yes. Yeah. So many banks utilize that program or facilitate that program.
Yeah.
For small businesses. So that it does pay to shop around.
We do have one credit union that does lend. Alaska USA does a lot of Alaska lending, and I don't know if they do SBA programs or not. So we're not super up to speed on Alaska USA. It's not a big commercial player in the types of commercial properties that we appraise.
Right.
So we're not totally familiar. But so if we left you out and you're an Alaska lender, sorry. What else is happening in Alaska?
Speaking of Alaska banks, Northrim has opened a Kodiak location. So they're expanding their services to Kodiak.
Well, we do a fair amount of work for Northrim Bank, and we don't like to go to Kodiak. So I guess
But it's good to see, though. I mean, it is good to see the banks that are focusing on Alaska markets and not reaching to...
Wells Fargo has been heavy in Kodiak for a while, and we know that they're mostly pulling out of commercial lending in Alaska. So good. There's a hole there, and Northrim Bank's one of the good ones. So I'm glad to see them expanding.
Yes. It's good to see, like I said, because we're seeing a lot of consolidations of other Alaska banks with national banks.
Key Bank's been pulling back. Wells Fargo's been liquidating their buildings in Alaska.
Right. Yeah. So it's good to see that local banks supporting Alaskans and not trying to grow outside. So we've seen one merger just recently where they are in Arizona and Oregon and all over the place. Alaska is kind of now their smallest share of the market. So
in fact, one of them just changed their name and no longer is Alaska something.
Right.
So good luck with that.
So it's
Wells Fargo left Alaskans, and Alaskans responded. And now all of a sudden they're not doing as well up here. So I don't know. Maybe there's a key to that. I will just say, don't pull your Iditarod funding. That tends to be a bad decision for Alaskan banks.
And sell half of your assets. But
that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Anyway, So that's the Alaska commercial real estate news, right? Well, great. All of those concepts, again, as we talk about space and eliminating space, buying space, redesigning space, redesignating space, and changing space, we're all talking about space. And what are the different types of space and terms that go along with that? Why don't you give us a couple of brief definitions if you have them, and then we can get to the question of the day.
That space is defined by how it's being measured typically. So there are certain terms that are used to describe how the space is measured and what it means. So a common term in commercial real estate is gross building area, or GBA.
And that's measured in. So we had an intern a while back who commonly measured things in terms of a good bit. What is the official length of a good bit?
Right. So it's
she didn't make it. She didn't make it in appraising. Her length of measurement was a good bit.
Right. Yeah. So there's other ways of measurement and other terms. So that's where some confusion comes from. So I think some of our questions we've had have been
Yeah. So the question is, and maybe I should have said that first. I threw you off. I apologize. I'm good at it. So the question really was, we've taken a couple of calls recently, and one of them was kind of a new landlord situation, new to renting residential properties. And they wanted to know, how do we come up with this? How much do I charge per square foot to rent my space? And in that case, it was fourplexes. And, I don't even remember how we addressed it with him because he didn't ultimately become a paying client.
Well,
so we don't give away everything for free to people who don't actually pay for the consulting.
Right. It's not common, though, in that situation that it would be measured, that your rent would be measured on a per square foot basis.
Yeah.
So
if it helps at all, it was a California investor who was coming here from California wanting to do things the California way, which if you don't know, doesn't really work well in Alaska. So,
well, it's very common in the residential area that they kind of have this lag of per square foot, and it's very common with agents because they think that explains everything. So
there's a lot of metrics in the multiple listing service, and especially in comp analysis buttons that do things by square foot.
Right.
And so it makes sense that that's the terminology that they use. But really in Alaska, and not just in Alaska, but in commercial especially, and we're talking income properties, right?
Yes.
We're not in a sales. We're talking in an income perspective. What we really see is a per what? A per
unit, a lot. So it's, and that would be, if in apartments, it would be per unit of apartment unit.
Yeah. And there may be an adjustment for gross rentable area or gross, what's the term in the residential world? Do they use leasable or?
Gross living area.
They do gross living.
Right.
Okay. So,
which in the commercial world, it's really net rentable area. So, being that it's still residential, the term can be.
We're mixing these terms.
Yeah, I know the terms can get.
We're getting in muddy waters here. So,
The measurement, though, of the space, so there would be the total gross area would be the entire building.
Okay.
All space.
GBA.
And then you would go from there. You would say your gross living area or your net rentable area.
Same thing.
Yes. It's the unit size that is being used by the tenant. So it'd be measured from the interior.
Okay.
And would include all space that the tenant is occupying.
So you would exclude the dimensions of the interior walls?
You would exclude, yes, the interior wall.
So a wall separating a room would be included, but a wall separating a mechanical space or something else would not.
Correct, yeah. And it does not include porches, patios, that nature. It would be the enclosed livable area. Mm-hmm. That it's being occupied. So, depending on how it's measured, it can vary. A little bit, a little slightly, and but that gives you a kind of a basis then of comparison. So the comparison though isn't by that per square foot though, it's based on the total area, so the total unit size.
The total unit with the amenities, and an adjustment for GLA might take place amongst other adjustments like room count, bathroom count, sink count.
And it wouldn't be an adjustment.
Pet door counts, window counts, south facing, northern light exposure windows versus southern sun exposure windows. And which one's worth more? One that faces the Aurora Borealis or one that faces the sun?
Well, southern facing windows are always preferred, I think, for some uses. So
and one of the new trends that is finally hitting Alaska, something that we've seen in other places, is the new alternative energy sources and solar and things like that. And so we're starting to see adjustments come into place for solar and sustainable materials. What you've taken green living classes. What are some of the other adjustments there? Since you're actually one of the green building specialists of Alaska.
Well, the difference in cost of heating. So
All right, so bringing it back in and getting ready to circle back around, let's just go ahead and restate those terms again. So in case you missed it, we're talking about gross building area, gross living area, or net rentable area. And what was the other term? Is that the three?
Those are the three most common, yes.
The three most common references in regard to how to classify and deal with per square foot space.
Correct.
So tell us again, what is GBA?
Gross building area, or GBA, is the in total enclosed area of a structure. So it's measured typically from the exterior.
The outermost improvement.
Exterior walls.
All the way around.
All the way around. So whatever that shape is, whatever that space.
It's been some weird shapes.
Yeah, contains. So, it's the enclosed space. So it's the total building area. So if you're looking at construction costs, it's very useful because you're talking about your actual enclosed area that you're building. Now, on the other hand, gross living area is typically used in residential, single-family markets, and it has a special definition. And
which is different depending on the program for the use or the appraisal or the background. VA has one thing, FHA has another.
Yes.
Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, which is federal housing. Those are all slightly different. Some of them have different teeth.
They have different rules.
And there's even a new way to measure now. This new thing called, what's it called? NAMBLA, something or what?
Yes,
give us the proper term. You're actually an expert in it.
It's the national standard of measurement. It's called ANSI. But
ANSI.
It's
ANSI Nancy.
It's
appraisers are
but the residential, depending, like you said, on the program that you fall under, determines a lot of how things are measured and what qualifies as gross living area. You'll often see those things broken out of above gross living area, above grade, and then below grade if you have basement space. So
if we could do like a public service to sales agents, please do not include your garage, basement, shed, attic, crawl space. Those are not all the square footage that goes into your listing. Please stop. Please stop doing that.
Right. So
that makes a lot of work for us later to have to go through and be like, wait a minute.
Right.
Wasn't there like an unfinished basement, otherwise known as a crawl space? Let's pull that square footage out. That's part of your gross building. You did have to pay to build it, but it's not a part of, you wouldn't rent that space.
Exactly.
And you can't really live in that space.
Yes, and that's the real crux of that definition is the livable space. So.
Well, and that's where finished basements really throw off a lot of sales agents, right? So the lesser experienced agents, either through bad training or just bad practices, I don't know of any underwriter that includes subsurface living space in the same square footage as above surface living space, right? So again, they want to know the square footage of it. You are going to have to tell them that, but it's not valued the same.
It is, yes. Depending on the market, it's, it looked at differently.
Right.
And it could have equal or different value equated to it, depending on the market and depending on the finish and the use and
Yeah, I mean, we don't value real estate in Antarctica, so it's possible that things are done differently there. All we're asking is that maybe Alaskan real estate sales agents stop putting their listings as if they're in Antarctica. We're on the other end, not that end. So we do things differently here. Yeah. So anyway, and then in the commercial world,
the most common term is a net rentable area in RA. And so if you're especially in a multi-tenant building, this is going to be the space that you are using as a tenant.
You get the bundle of rights for, which not necessarily the fire control room, not necessarily the mechanical room or that big tank of water on the roof that's going to support your sprinklers.
Right.
You shouldn't be charged for that. That's an amenity to your space that it's attached to the building. If you don't control the space, either in full or in common,
correct,
then it's not really a part of.
Right. And so then there can be common area
classified differently.
Which is, classified differently, and typically is like a percentage associated to each tenant. So
Okay, so there's a lot of different types of square footage and kind of some new terms that we haven't talked about on the show before. So hopefully we've put all those up on the screen and you understand them. But if you have questions about appraisal terms or real estate terms or business valuation terms or whatever, you could ask those questions to the show. And if they are entertaining or interesting, or we could, somehow feature them with a story that has come up for the week. We'd love to feature it on the show. And the way to contact the show is through our email, show, as HOW at AKCREtoday.com. That's Alaska Commercial Real Estate Today.com. And that's going to wrap it up for week 9, March, almost a breakup in Alaska. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Goodbye.